Hey everybody, it is April the 7th, and I know that you were just as excited to turn the page. In fact, let me go ahead and do that. Turn the page from Judges and look at today's reading and go, oh, Ruth. Never has the story of Ruth ever been so welcomed as when we finish reading these words. In those days, Israel had no king, and all the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. But in these same days of Judges, we have this situation, and we meet Ruth, and we meet Naomi, and we just immerse ourselves in this love story, so to speak. And I couldn't help today but notice, by the way, MIL means mother-in-law, in case you don't know. That's okay if you don't know, because there's lots of those little abbreviations I don't know. And I was sitting here looking at my notes thinking I maybe should spell that out, but I think not. I like it, MIL. It empowers us to know some of these little short abbreviation things that they use now. I don't know what they're called. It's not an abbreviation, but anyways. As I read the story again, I could not help but think of my mother-in-law and just the impact that she had on my life. My mother and my mother-in-law were actually really good friends, and my husband's family and my family grew up in the same church, which is it's not a usual thing in these days and this day and age. But my mother-in-law and my mom actually went on trips together with the church. They sat in choir together, in the senior choir they sang together. They were big buddies. And my mother went to live in heaven April 8th, 2021. My mother-in-law went to live in heaven July 4th, 2021. So I have a feeling they're probably sitting in heaven's choir right now. And I bet my mother-in-law was singing more in tune than she did when she was on earth. She loved to make a joyful noise. And it's okay that I say that because she knows it. But anyways, just had a wonderful mother-in-law. Taught me so many things. And I catch myself doing things and I think, oh, goodness, this is a lot like Betty. This is a lot like Scott's mom. This is a lot like Betty Pope. But loved her. So I couldn't help but think of her and the life that she lived. She was one of, it's either 11 or 12. I can't remember. Because I know one of her siblings died young. But she was very, very poor. And she fed the chickens through the floor of her house and could see the stars through the ceiling. And worked on a cotton farm, picked and they grew their own food. She had to milk cows before she went to work. Her dresses were made out of flour sacks. And married my father-in-law and had 4 children. And she could pinch, what was it? Somebody said she could make the buffalo on a nickel poop. She knew how to save money. She knew how to take care of her home. She was a fine lady. And yet she could get out there and spread her turkey manure in her garden and in her flower beds, and she could grow anything. So she just was a magnificent woman. But I will tell you, there's a similarity in the story of Ruth and my mother-in-law. Whereas Ruth lost 2 of her sons, my mother-in-law lost 1 of her sons. I'm married to one, and she had another son who died. And a year after her son died, her husband died. So she could have shriveled up. she could have turned away from God. She could have spent the remainder of her days angry. My father-in-law died. He wasn't my father-in-law at the time, but died at 59. So she lived to be 89. So had she gotten mad at God and dug her heels in the sand and just turned her back on him, she would have really had a good majority of her life to be miserable. And she would have been miserable. And I think of the impact that that would have had on the rest of her family had she not dug her heels in the sand and turned to God instead of turning from God. So I love that the Lord has allowed me to have this moment with Ruth and the parallel that he has drawn between Ruth and my mother-in-law, because her circumstances got really tough. Really, really tough. Ruth and Betty Sue. But both of them turned towards God instead of away from God. Now, we don't really know the circumstances behind this famine that was in the days of Israel. I suspect it was because they were disobedient. Scripture is very clear. God said very clearly, you disobey me, I'm going to bring famine on the land. I'm going to bring death. I'm going to bring disease. I'm going to do whatever it takes to turn you back to me. So that's what we kind of can conjecture happened here. And they left the place of protection. Even though there was a famine there, they left. And so there's a lot of speculation of, were they being punished because they didn't stay? Were they, who knows? Who knows why circumstances happen the way they do? We don't know. But we know that when her circumstances got even worse than a famine, she knew where to go, and that was to go back home to where the dwelling place of Yahweh, of her God, was. And I looked at the relationship that she had with her God and how it impacted other people. My mother-in-law's relationship with God impacted so many people. She served, we've said for years that she baked enough cakes to fill an ocean for people. And she took meals, and when she grew her garden, she shared her vegetables, and she took care of friends who were dying of cancer and stood in the shower with them and washed them. And just an impact of God in her, she allowed it to impact others, and others saw that. And her children saw that. Her grandchildren saw that. Her great-grandchildren saw that. And in Ruth's case, her daughter-in-laws saw that. So much so that, and you know what? I think I've been calling the mother-in-law Ruth, and I meant to say Naomi. I'm sorry about that. Forgive me. I caught myself. But Naomi, Ruth wanted to go with Naomi, regardless of what it might have meant for her to enter into the promised land, the place of God's people. She says, your God will be my God. You're not going without me. She saw something in her mother-in-law that made her want to follow God. So whether we're a mother-in-law or not, are people seeing something in us that make them want to follow our God? Do people look at our circumstances and say, wow, look at how she's turning to her God and how her God is strengthening her through this time? And I love this last point is I don't have to act like nothing is wrong. I can be honest with others and with God about my feelings. When she went back, she was like, don't call me Naomi. You call me Mara. I'm bitter. I've got this, my life is a mess. And God has allowed these circumstances to happen. But I'm coming back to God. But don't call me by that same name. And I love that because in the midst of losing my brother-in-law and my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, she allowed herself to feel that pain. She allowed herself to be hurt. She allowed herself to cry. She allowed herself to feel it all. But she never turned from God. And we have such encouragement with Ruth's mother-in-law, don't we? So, as I said, if you're not a mother-in-law now, maybe you will be one day. I know I will be, God willing, if that's His plan for my children. I want them to see me as I saw my mother-in-law and as Ruth saw her mother-in-law, that when the circumstances get tough, I turn right to God. And that my daily life, everything that I do, everything that I say, would make somebody want to know my God. And to live a life that I can be honest about my feelings, but I can also be honest with my feelings about God or to God, but they don't, whatever happens with my feelings, they don't make me turn from God. So I hope that I am one day the kind of mother-in-law that I had to my son-in-law, which is an SIL, or my daughter-in-law, my DIL, or as many call them now, daughter-in-loves and son-in-loves. So just a wonderful lesson today. So much to learn from Naomi. And I'm so grateful that her story is recorded in the ancient text. Aren't you? We'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.